Okay, I think we're going to get started. I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. My name is Julie Toomey, and I am the marketing manager for EBSCO Books. So I just want to welcome everyone to Taking Flight Together, how libraries, publishers, and aggregators collaborate with an accessibility-first mindset to elevate UX for all. And I'm joined today by Vanessa from Amsterdam University Press, Brandon from San Diego State University, Mary from Strayer University, and Emma representing EBSCO eBooks. And I'm sure folks have already seen the code of conduct, but the Charleston Conference strives to make this inclusive and positive for everyone. So if you want to learn more, feel free to scan the code. And now I'd like to pass over to my colleague Emma to get us started to talk about what is changing with accessibility regulations.
Okay, can people hear me okay? All right, I got the fancy microphone. Okay, so first I want to say none of us are lawyers, so this is not a legal panel, but there are a couple of regulatory things changing in the accessibility space in the next couple of years that kind of set the frame for what we're talking about today. So those two big regulatory changes are the European Accessibility Act, which goes into effect June 28th of 2025, and then the ADA Title II updates in the US, which go into effect of April 2026 and 2027, depending on population served. So ultimately, these new laws mandate accessibility of products, content, and services, and so they go a little bit further than previous legislation. And the EAA in particular has been translated into laws at each EU member state level that will be enforced by each of those member states, and they carry very specific requirements for ebooks in particular, which is why we wanted to have this conversation today. And there are also very specific fines and penalties defined by each of those member states that put a very clear sort of line in the sand to say this is what we will hold you accountable for. And it has helped, I think, really underscore the seriousness of this commitment, recommitment to accessibility worldwide, but specifically, nearest term in the EU. And if we can go to the next slide. So that's the sort of regulatory frame, but I think the more important piece and the thing that brings us all together in these conversations is the human piece of this. So this is a legal responsibility that we all have a piece of, but ultimately what we're trying to do is support the users in our communities and offer access to information as a human right. The EAA explicitly frames this as a human rights issue, and so that is the same frame that we want to apply. And this quote from George Kirscher, who some folks may be familiar from the DAISY Consortium, is in his email signature. It goes to everyone he emails, and I think it's just the perfect way to sum up what we're trying to achieve here, which is that in our information age, access to information is a fundamental human right. So with that, I think we'll turn it over to the sort of panel style discussion.
Great, thanks, Emma. And so this is going to be a Q&A style, so we'll go through each presenter will answer a question that we tee up. So the first one here is how are EAA and updated ADA Title II regulations going to affect us as libraries, publishers, and aggregators? And let's start with Vanessa.
Yes, so I'm from a university press. We're mid-sized, and as a university press, we share the same mission as the libraries do, as the aggregators do. We all want our research to be made available in the most accessible way as possible. For us, that means we're very author concentrated. So the first thing that we look at is our authors, because they create the content that we need. They're very important. So that's one side to this story for us, the authors. The other side is the more business side to getting the research to our audience, to the users, to the same researchers often, which includes production, marketing, and the distribution of content. So for production, well, one of the obvious things is that as a university press, we've always published our digital content in PDF format. And we're now looking at also publishing that in an EPUB 3 format, which is for us a complete new workflow. It means that we have to adjust our existing workflows, change them. Editorial is going to change. The way that we work with our authors is going to change. And on the distribution side, we don't have our own content platform, so we're reliant on vendors and on the aggregators. So it means that we have to rethink our dissemination routes. We have to talk to the vendors and see how we can support them best, how they can support us best, which is also a big change in the way that we've worked so far. The marketing is very much centered around metadata, so that's another thing that we have to enrich and make sure that it carries the right information through. And last but not all is the budget balancing that we need to do, because we're not a funded press, so we need to find ways to make this possible from a budgetary point of view. So yeah, those are challenges, but very exciting things to work on.
Thank you, Vanessa. Brandon?
Yeah, so a little bit, I am currently the AD for Collections and Discovery at San Diego State University, but just recently I transferred to that. I've only been there for 2 months, but before that I was head of collections at Colorado. So I'm going to speak more from that perspective and how I approached it there. You know, for us, looking at accessibility again as a human right, and we really wanted to make sure that we were looking at that as we were negotiating vendor contracts and making sure it was front and center when we were having those conversations. Does that mean every vendor met those needs or, you know, was able to provide that? No. And did we not go with a vendor because of that? No. But I do think it helps push the conversation if you start having that as a talking point when you're going into those negotiations, because I don't know, I look at these as partnerships, and vendors will only do what we ask them to do. And until we do that, they're not going to really know what our needs are. And I know there's different viewpoints on that and different feelings about it, but that's how I approach it. And I think negotiations of a contract of a new term is a great place to start that. We entered into a contract with Sage when I first got to CSU, one, because we needed more undergraduate resources, but also a lot of their resources come with this accessibility already baked in, which was really easy for us. And that seemed like a no-brainer to me, but we did add that as a metric when we were evaluating and looking at collections from that point of view. And I think, again, I feel like just a mechanism to get the conversation started and understanding that this isn't going to happen overnight. Unfunded mandates, which I love to say, that's how those work. So.
Thanks, Brandon. Mary?
Yes, thank you. Thank you. You were stealing some of my talking points there about talking about vendors. In my role at Strayer University, we are online teaching adult students, and my role, I oversee library tutoring services and also the writing center. And I really think of vendors as part of my extended team. So absolutely, to start off with, one way that this affects is reinforcing of how we all should think of vendors as our extended colleagues, our partners. When we succeed, they succeed. And so speak up with your vendors, speak up with your leaders, whoever is meeting with sales staff about your needs and your wants, right? So really helping to firm up what do you want to see this year, next year, to help them build their roadmap, right, for their features. I'd also say this is a good chance for us in our place to be working with our internal partners, working with our course dev teams, our bookstore. We happen to have ebooks in over 50 classes, and those tend to be PDFs. So maybe this is a chance to rethink processes in course build cycles, choosing content with faculty members, starting at the source. So maybe not necessarily going backwards, but in the next round of choices, thinking about EPUB 3 versus PDF, right? So when you're meeting with your faculty members, you're encouraging adoption of your content, looking forward, not backward. Strategic goals as well. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. I love when something is in a strategic plan, because then it becomes a funded goal, right? Because every leader wants to check off measures of issue success, objectives, your plan, and for us at Strayer, we happen to be finishing up our latest issue strategic plan 3-year, and we are looking towards our next plan. So of course, accessibility was already present in it, but now with the courtesy of Uncle Sam, we get to elevate it even higher. And again, right, when you have these goals in writing, it is oftentimes easier for resources. So whether that's money or time or attention, whatever that resource might be, to then make your plans goals and then wins. So when you're then reporting out to your board of trustees or whatnot on your successes, you have been able to transform the unfunded mandate into a win to celebrate. I'm just saying.
You did better than I did.
Positivity, okay? That is my mantra.
Good for you. That's all.
Thanks, Mary. Emma?
I don't know if I want to follow that one, Mary. That was just such a beautiful bow on top of that. So I'll just add a couple of other comments. So coming from the aggregator and the platform perspective, I think all of the context that's already been shared applies to what we're trying to do as well, ultimately, which is to bring through all of the work, to partner with our libraries to understand their needs, and then make that available through the platform for the end user or for the librarian as they're either building a collection, trying to find resources that fit their users' needs, or acquire new resources to meet those goals. And so specifically for ebooks, the EAA does put very clear requirements forward for functionality that ebook reader content provider platforms must provide. So those include leveraging accessibility metadata. Vanessa talked about this. So one of the things we need to do is help the discovery of accessible content. And so we need to know from the publishers, what have you included in that file, any issues that you know about it, et cetera, so that we can pass that information along as well. And then as far as platform functionality, things like text-to-speech, line spacing, word spacing, paragraph spacing, font size controls, these are all requirements under the EAA. So if we didn't already have them, we need to add them to the experience to meet that minimum bar of the EAA. And all of this also implies and requires that our software, which we've already been building for accessibility, is meeting a WCAG 2.1 AA standard at a minimum. And so all of that from the provider platform is at play. And so again, knowing from our customers, our librarian customers, what their priorities are and how we make choices about content or displaying information, or choices that we might make about that, as well as having information and a feedback cycle with our publishers so that we can understand their capabilities and challenges on the content side, all kind of comes together on the aggregator platform. And so the other piece of this that will be so crucial as we go forward as of June 28th, everybody could interpret this a little differently. So that feedback loop will need to continue. So how have we met the mark? What is still not ideal? Maybe it's meeting the letter of the regulation, but maybe you would prefer we offer something a little bit differently or more choices. So that's another thing that I think that as we roll this out across platforms, there will be different implementations, and then we can kind of see which ones land best in the market and sort of consolidate around those.
Thanks, Emma. Our next question is, what accessibility-first approaches are being used to successfully impact library and content accessibility? So let's start with Mary.
Thank you. I'll feel like a broken record here soon because, again, my notes, it's speaking with your vendors. Volunteering for focus groups, surveys, sessions where they're making issue choices and judgments, right? Many vendors, some of which are here in this room, I have reached out to myself to just say, hey, you don't know me, I don't know you, but I would love to give you my 2 cents from my adult students working 100% online, reading ebook textbooks. They do not purchase print books, right? I would love to chime in. So again, starting with your vendors. Additionally, training. Some of us have the blessing of having in-house team members who are experts in these areas. Some of us also may have legal eagles on our teams who are experts in these areas. But if not, reach out to ask for trainings, to meet with colleagues in your consortia, within your state, within your association, whatever groups that you're a member of, right? Share in that as collective knowledge, because you're not alone. We aren't alone. So reaching out first. I'd also say earlier at lunch today, I had this wonderful flyer, which at the end of our PowerPoint will have a QR code of resources. But there is this amazing link to accessible vendors. And it is from the Accessibility Alliance, LAA. And, so when you're looking at new vendors, new vetting for she content, be accessible first, right? Bringing up those questions at the start of your chat with that vendor, instead of maybe later on when it normally would have been.
Thanks, Mary. Randon?
Yeah, just to add to this conversation with an example, at Colorado, part of my portfolio was course reserves. And during the pandemic, that had gone completely digital. And so one of the things that we did with that unit was to bake in accessibility, right? So right before I left, we were looking for new equipment, a new copier for scanning, because book scans were just exploding. As soon as faculty realized we were scanning entire books, they were all over it, though they did not understand that was done page by page. So we were looking for a new scanner that we could debind and then run it through. But we also found one that would automatically put in accessibility OCR, am I saying that right? OCR technology into it. So that was sort of what we did. And my example of that is sort of doing what you can where you can, right? I think sometimes in libraries we get sort of paralyzed because we think it has to be everything or nothing. And while I wish that were, how I wish that we could always produce a perfect product, I think it's valuable to do what you can where you can, and always sort of pushing forward with more and accepting that you're not doing everything, because I think these standards are going to be changing, as we realize different needs. But I think that was important, and at CSU we tried to put that into our mindset, was that we were going to do what we could to make sure that our students, as best we could, were able to get access to the content. So that's sort of an example of accessibility first approach. Again, collections, we were looking at vendor licenses and seeing where that was, and we actually used that website, the Library Accessibility Alliance website. It was very valuable, and you can actually go on there and suggest. So if they don't have a database on there, you can suggest they do an assessment of it, which is super handy.
Thanks, Randon. Vanessa?
Yes. Well, as a publisher, we're at the start of this supply chain, this value chain, right? And I completely agree with you both. A lot of it is about communication. It's a human endeavor, what we're facing, and it all started for us. It all started with communication and trying to find people with whom we could talk, who were willing to support us, with whom we also could be vulnerable and say, we have no idea what we're going to do. What are we going to do? And that sort of search for people and support, that went from trying to figure out how do we include the authors, because they're the content creators. Possibly we will need to give them new skills. We will have to train them. We will have to train ourselves first, because we want them to still create the content, which also means alt text, for example, is part of something that they will have to be busy with moving forward, whether it's editing or creating it. That's the author side. And on the other side, we are working with a local pre-press vendor, and we kind of debated, what are we going to do? There's talks about faraway pre-press vendors that we could contact, but let's start with the local partner. Let's see what the discussion leads to. And the funny thing is that we both had no idea, so we said, okay, let's do it together. Let's make a plan together. Let's educate each other. Let's figure out how this is going to work, because they needed the skill sets too. And we were by accident, the first ones to approach them. So all these, and then obviously on the dissemination side, I started contacting the aggregators. Like, what's happening out there? Everyone has a different approach. It's not easy. But the most important thing is to keep the conversation going. And for us, that means at the moment trying to find a way to offer a wide variety of options, trying to do that at least, so that we are sure that in a period of transition, both PDF and EPUB find their ways. So it's, I think, having that conversation on all sides of the spectrum that you're working in is a really important thing. And we're all in the same boat. So yeah.
Thanks, Vanessa. Emma?
Sure. Yeah, so I'll take a little bit of a different tactic here. There are a lot of things I wanted to add to the sort of conversation on this particular topic, but I'll highlight just a couple that we use specifically at EBSCO, focused on both our software development processes and then on our work with publishers. So from the software development angle, we include users with accessibility needs as we are writing requirements for new features and functionality. We include our on-staff resources as well as experts outside if we need their advice. As well as when we are testing things before they go to live. So we do have automated testing in place with our software, but we also have user usability testing, users who use keyboards, who use screen readers, et cetera. Our teams also do that, but there's no replacement for somebody who really understands the workflow as a person with a disability. And that has been, I think, really just so positive and important for all of us to learn as well as we go through this process. Another thing that we've been very, lucky to have sort of alignment around is in our software development process, we build these little components. So they're software components that then get scaled across our platform, and the accessibility is baked into them. So if there's a search box that's reused across the platform, it already has appropriate tagging, color contrast, statefulness, et cetera, so that as development teams are putting that same thing around the product for different use cases, they don't have to reinvent the wheel with the accessibility. So it helps us to achieve that consistency and that accessibility. And that's been a long process, working with our research and development team, our developers, so that we actually have a way to do that consistently. And then on the content side, as Vanessa mentioned, working with publishers sort of ongoing, it's an iterative conversation, is a really big part of what we do. And so when we bring a new publisher into our process, we upfront talk to them about formats. We want both PDF and EPUB, EPUB 3 preferably, and then work with them as we load their content. We validate it all. We validated over 1.5 million EPUB files against WCAG 2.2 AA, and we continue to validate every new or updated file that we get. And that gives us data to give back to the publisher and say, you did great on all of these things, and there are a couple of gaps that we're seeing with your files. So that helps us know how our product is going to be, working for users with accessibility needs, but it also helps us sort of keep the ecosystem on the same page, where maybe the work that the vendors are doing with the publisher is great, but it's missing a piece or something's getting lost in the transmission. And so it gives us all a way to sort of align on that end goal together.
Thanks, Emma. And our last question is, how can I clarify my institution's position on accessibility and gauge our readiness to meet new regulations? So let's start with Emma.
I forgot I was going back to back. Okay. All right. So again, I'm going to kind of speak from the platform perspective here because that is my perspective, but there is applicability here. So basically, it's if you have software, there are things that you want to consider, and then if you have content, there are things that you want to consider. So on the software piece, a few key things sort of to understand your current position and what you might need to do to reach a higher level of accessibility is going to be very basic when I say this, but having a current audit of your platform done by an external vendor, having documentation like a VPAT and an ACR, which is an accessibility conformance report, created that can tell anybody who wants to buy or use your product how it meets all of the criterion that are outlined in the WCAG. Another piece of this that I would highly recommend, and a lot of providers already do this, is to create an accessibility statement. So this helps you explain your product in sort of layman's terms and says, this is how it works. It is, this kind of conformance, but this is also the way we recommend you use certain types of tools and functions with our product because of its specific special nature here and there and whatever. It's also a great educational experience for your internal team if you haven't done one of these, because you will start to think about, how does somebody who's using a screen reader but has low vision use our product? How do we think about, maybe a limitation with super old content? What would we recommend they do in that case? So it gives you a framework to think about how to sort of guide people through your product. And on the QR code on the next slide, there's a link to Textbox, which is a great resource for building an accessibility statement, and they'll review it for you. So that's something that I would highly recommend. I'm eating up my time here, but I'm going to go quickly. So the other piece I just want to say on the content side, so I already talked about this a little bit, but if you have content, receive content, sell content, knowing how you are going to validate it for accessibility is a big hurdle. You need to know what kind of format you're getting, what kind of tooling is available for you to validate that content against what kind of standard, and then what kind of information do you need out of that to either communicate to others in the value stream, put on your product, both. And so that's a big piece of this that I think is really important. So again, we have resources on the next slide. I'm going to stop talking in a second, but just generally, all of this is best approached communally. So in line with the spirit of our talk, continuing to work together, finding SMEs, building communities where there aren't any, that's something that we can all do to help keeping this moving forward. And as I think Brandon said, the standards are going to keep evolving. So this is never a job done. It's, a job that we need to sort of all keep working on together.
Thanks, Emma. Vanessa?
Yes, I think as a publisher, where we need to be communicating and making sure that authors, potential authors, researchers, users who are both on our side but also on the library side, that they know that a publisher is offering these formats, has a plan, has a strategic plan, knows how to, helps the authors to create content that is accessible. So that's one part of the job that we need to make sure that that knowledge of how we work is accessible and is public knowledge. Same goes for when we approach this big job that we have in front of us. We're approaching it in a way that we're thinking, okay, so let's focus on the front list first. At least we can tell everybody, we can tell all our vendors, we can tell all the partners that we work with that every book that's published as from June 25 will have an accessible EPUB format, EPUB 3 format. Let's start with that and make sure that you build the reputation and the knowledge that the libraries, the vendors, they know what to expect from us. After we've sort of set that parameter, we can focus on, okay, what do we do with the backlist? Do we chunk it? Do we choose different subjects? How are we approaching this? There's more time for that, but so there's also more time to look at that in different ways. Open access, yes or no? And I think also the statement as publishers that we can make is to be part of the knowledge center and to offer skill sets where needed, but also to educate ourselves continuously. And that's also a message that you can send out as an institution. So yes. That's it.
Thanks, Vanessa. Randon?
Yeah, so again, I'm a collection strategist, so I come from a policy standpoint, and I think that for me, those have power, and if you write those into your collection development policy, into your negotiation, we had sort of goals or what do we call it? I can't remember, my brain's gone. But basically when we go to negotiation, we say, here's what we would like to see, open access, uncapped, and then accessibility on that too. And I think those all send messages. I don't think this is going to be solved, but I think we're pushing the needle in that direction. And I think it makes the vendors aware and your constituents aware that that's important to you because you're putting that into a document that's holding you accountable as a way of communication. So I look at it that way. I think also I'm thinking on the side of it too is like making sure you have spaces within the library and technology within the library that helps those students as well. So it's one thing to push the vendors, but also making sure that your library is making accommodations, thinking neurodiversity and that kind of thing, and making sure that that's something that you're looking at in a different way, kind of tangential to this conversation.
Thanks, Randon. Mary?
Thank you. This will be my answer where I don't talk about vendors. Rather, partnerships within your org. Reaching out to other groups, other teams that run websites and content, finding partners in other groups, right? Whether it's your faculty councils, student wellness center, right? Everyone has these new rules for their websites, and you might find some new allies, some new partners to pool resource requests, to maybe instead of fixing items yourself when you have 6, 7 different teams requesting, perhaps then you as she could have special staffing added to your need to have it addressed, right? Also, reaching out to your leader, asking them, maybe not necessarily in a town hall situation, but maybe in private, how are we affected? What is our size? What is our deadline? What are the exception items that we do not have to worry about right now? What are the common items we need to focus on, right? And also be ready to volunteer to help, right? So those are just a few ways I think that any of us could join in to help clarify and get involved with, again, right, working to serve all users, to help more patrons, customers, clients, right, get better use out of our existing fantastic content.
Thanks, Mary. Now, here's the QR code that you can scan. So you'll find resources like our panelists mentioned, such as the resources for vendors, along with a bevy of other things. So the resources that you'll find here are for libraries and for publishers. Feel free to share this link with your colleagues. So I'm going to actually keep this up while we take some questions. So it looks like we have about 9 minutes left. So if you have a question, we have a volunteer that is going to come around with a microphone. Please introduce yourself before you ask your question, and we'll be happy to take those.
No questions?
You're pretty amazing.
Well, thank you for all of us.
Hi, my name's Aurora, and I am asking from a publisher perspective, small university press. As we get our EPUBs where they need to be for accessibility, one of our biggest concerns is the metadata piece of it. And my question is, to what degree you and at EBSCO, but also libraries, are talking with other vendors about how to receive the accessibility metadata, so that as we publishers hear from you what you need, we are hopefully putting everything in one place and not going through a patchwork system of getting each of the aggregators and other partners that we work with the information so that it can ultimately reach the end user.
That's a good one. I'm happy to speak to that from my point of view. And then Vanessa, if there's anything that you want to add from the publisher side and the library side. So a couple of things that I would say just around this is that we don't want to create additional work for publishers either. We want this to be as sort of standardized as possible so that you can do it one way and then everybody has consistent information. I know standards are sometimes the silver bullet that don't actually solve all the problems, but there are a couple of ways that accessibility metadata can be communicated. And the first is in the EPUB file itself. So that has fields in it where you can identify all the features, hazards, functionality, certification, anything that you've done for your content can be included in the EPUB file. And that is from the EBSCO ebook standard what we would prefer because it's attached to the content file itself, as opposed to another method which is completely valid, which is Onyx. So Onyx 3 includes new code lists for accessibility. You can itemize all of your accessibility features there. The only sort of challenge with that is it's more of an accessibility claim because it's separate from the content file, right? So we validate the EPUBs ourselves through the ACE checker by Daisy. We get a very sort of objective measure of the accessibility of that title out of that tool. And so the EPUB metadata would be sort of our preference, but it's not to say that Onyx data isn't as valid. It's just not tied to the file itself in the same way. But again, we really want to follow standards there. We don't want to have people bending over backwards to do special things if we don't need them to. So I hope that helps a little bit. Vanessa, is there anything you would add to that, or?
Well, we do both things. So we provide metadata in the file, which is very detailed. But we also use Onyx for that. And honestly, you can use Onyx in the most extensive way as you wish. You know, there's the basic fields, but you can go a lot further than that. But what we're going to do is just start with the basic fields. So we use a cloud-based Onyx provider, and they have in the past year completed the new steps to add those fields. So we're starting with very simple, at least tagging the EPUB with the accessibility tags, so that it's different, so that the metadata is different from the PDF. Just to start with that. And from there on, depending on your resources, you can make it very extensive. I don't know how extensive, that might be for us, but.
Well, and that's actually one of the things I'm very curious to see once we, start rolling out all of this. We see more and more of this data coming through from the library perspective. How much is helpful versus, a list of 50, 60, 70 fields? Is that going to be consumable and easy for people to interpret, or is that going to be too much? Is there a certain core set of fields? And there is a recommendation coming out of Daisy around how best to present certain fields for accessibility. So that's something that we'll be looking to support. It's a pretty short list at this point, and maybe that will be enough, or maybe it will need to grow over time. Is there anything from the library side that you guys would add there? Or? No. Okay.
I mean, I think from my perspective, like you were saying, the most streamlined and easiest, because I'm thinking of limited staffing, right? We're not going to have people being able to do extra workflows or extra tasks to get this done. So yeah, anything that can be condensed would be great.
Yes.